Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Autism Stories. I'm your host, Doug Bletcher, the founder of Autism Personal Coach. Autistic people are the true experts of the autistic experience, and Autism Stories is where we interview autistic people to learn from their stories, experiences, and get their insights. If you would like to be notified about each week's episode of Autism Stories, we suggest you subscribe on your favorite podcast listening platform. We would also appreciate it if you could give us a positive rating and review, as it will help others to learn about autism stories. On today's episode, Loren Snow joins us to discuss working with professionals and parents to better support autistic children. We also discuss how mealtime can be one of the most traumatic experiences at home and how to better support your autistic loved ones during these times. We hope you enjoy today's conversation. Loren, thanks so much for joining me here on Autism Stories.
Thank you for having me, Doug.
I wanted to start off and learn where things begin for you. Where does your story in the autistic community start?
Okay, well, I think like a lot of autistic people, I knew that I was different from a young age. And even before I knew, the other children definitely knew that I was different. But I didn't receive a diagnosis until my early to mid 20s. I first of all got an ADHD diagnosis first, and I went down that route because, well, quite simply, the media from a young age kind of painted this picture of autism that I didn't think was me. Nowadays, we know autism's a lot different than what we were told in the past, and ADHD didn't have the same kind of stigma in the UK, at least. It was when getting that diagnosis that suddenly a lot of things, or on the route to get that diagnosis, a lot of things started making sense. However, it didn't quite fit everything, and it opened up my eyes almost to discovering more about autism. And well, here we are. I'm autistic. That may not be a very good exploration of my journey, but that's certainly how it started.
And you're a consultant and have taught tens of thousands of parents of autistic children and have worked with many organizations from schools to the National Autistic Society and National Health Service England. So, one of the things you've done is help parents to engage with occupational therapists and other professionals to better support their kids. What are some things you think it might be helpful to look for from professionals to know if they're actually a good fit for supporting your child to learn and grow?
Okay, that's a big question, and I think I realised that I didn't explain a little bit about what I do and my background to you. So I'll start. I'll start there. So I mentioned my route to get diagnosed, but when I received when I was going through the process of receiving my diagnosis, I decided to join some parenting classes that were teaching parents about diagnosis. And so that's kind of how I started my career. I was processing my own diagnosis as I was supporting parents to understand their children. And back then, about a decade ago, parents would get a diagnosis and then they'd get onto one of our courses. And the process was fairly quick. You didn't have to wait particularly long. But as the years went on, the wait list just for the course became almost 2 years. And now in the same area, if you want to get your child diagnosed, you're waiting about 3.5 years for that diagnosis. If you're an adult, you're waiting about 5 years for a diagnosis on the National Health Service. So it's kind of changed from a lot of people coming in utterly clueless about autism to now parents and autistic people come along and they're already very clued up about autism. And a lot of them don't just recognize now they're autistic, the children are autistic, they recognize that they are themselves. So it's a very different training landscape. Along that process, I have now, at the point a decade later, where I've been in person training tens of thousands of parents. But you've also mentioned my NHS work. So, a bulk of what I do currently is I'm the lead trainer for the National Health Service's rollout of some new mandatory training on autism. So, this is actually really cool, Doug. It's really sad and tragic because an autistic guy with a learning disability died in a hospital because, well, there was a lot of failings. But as a result of that, now there's new mandatory training for every single member of the National Health Service, which is about 3 million people. So it's kind of game changing. And I'm the lead trainer of a small slice of that, about 50,000 National Health Service staff in my area. But yeah, that's, I guess, a small chunk of what I do. And you asked me the question of what I think it was what we do to support young autistic children. Was that right?
Yeah, in terms of like helping parents to like figure out like what professionals would actually be helpful in working with them and helping them to learn and grow, because certainly not all professionals are helpful to us as adults or kids.
It's quite tough for me to tell you because I just mentioned the barrier to seeking out a diagnosis. First of all, the barrier doesn't even start when you're on the waiting list. So you're a parent and you tell your child's different and you want to know where to go to support. If you seek out an official diagnosis, you're going to have lots of pushback. First of all, you're meant to go to someone called a pediatrician, and they're then meant to, or a GP, and they're meant to refer. However, in the UK, GPs are not, and pediatricians are not very clued up on up to date information about autism. So we still have lots of parents that are saying to us, my GP says you can't diagnose it until it's 8. Or my GP says they can't possibly be autistic because they've got ADHD. Or my GP says you can't tell in a girl until they're in their teens. All sorts of nonsense. If you're a parent seeking out support, your school may not understand at all because most teachers have had no training. Schools are required to have they're called SENCOs, a special education needs coordinator, but they themselves could be managing, be a regular teacher that is given a few hours one afternoon to come up with ideas to support all of the autistic children, all the other children with disabilities. And they themselves at the same time could be studying their qualification while in the position. So schools often have no clue. The professionals that are meant to refer often have no clue, and they put up barriers to referral. When you get on a referral, sometimes you may get denied a referral because your child isn't in extreme enough circumstances. Recently, I wrote it. Recently, one area I used to work in, even if your child was in hospital or had, having serious self-harming behaviors and all a ton of other risk factors, that still doesn't qualify you for a referral for diagnosis. And then once you've got on a referral, you still may be waiting. You'd be waiting a very long time and not triaged. And if they become if they become 18 during that period of waiting, they then get switched to the adult wait lists. So you'll get bumped back down again. I hope I'm painting it's kind of a grim picture, but often nowadays, a lot of parents, they go and get private diagnoses, which are often quite expensive, but that's what they do. Or they go to local organizations like one I work with that gives free training sessions and free one-to-one support because there's nowhere else, essentially. That was it's quite a bleak picture. And I said to you today, Doug, I've been delivering a session on mental health and autism. So, that was talking about the current UK statistics around suicide, and that's for autistic people, and it's incredibly grim. So you've got me on a day where
I got you. As autistic people, we have many different co occurring conditions. And one of those can be writing challenges due to dysgraphia. And I learned about you because I saw a video that you created discussing some strategies to help dysgraphic people. So, what might be some of those things that can help those with dysgraphia when they absolutely kind of are forced to have to write?
ah, oh, that's feels like $1 million question. I personally haven't found much in terms of support for dysgraphia myself. I even remember, even though it was a known issue for me in college. So, we have high school, and then we go to college, and then we go to university. But college normally makes lots of adaptations, and I was well aware that I had this difficulty. But the only accommodation they gave me was you still have to sit and write the exam with pen on paper, but you can take in some heat pads with you so you can, I don't know, keep your wrists going. Uh, I mean, that wasn't very good. Nowadays, it's a bit of a postcode lottery. Different schools, different colleges offer different support, and if you can push. But in terms of if you have to write, in terms of education, you can get rest breaks, which I got at university. You can be given extra time, which means you can spend more time maybe concentrating and writing in the way that they want. You can also be allowed to use a computer with a keyboard if that works for you. So nowadays, especially when you get into higher education, there are lots of adaptations. But what's personally helped me is from a very young age, I found that pencils were less painful and easier to use because of the traction of the tips. Some people have been putting on my YouTube videos that they find fountain pens helpful because of the traction. But even this pen in front of me has got a very fine tip. And I just find that because of that traction, it's easier for me to write because it's not as slippy. I don't have to use as much of my muscles to hold it in place.
You've also created several different webinars, and one of them that I wanted to talk to you about was autism and eating difficulties. Now, there can be many different reasons why, as autistic people, we might have trouble eating. How would you go about determining what that cause might be, each
Well,
individual?
Well, Doug, I've just finished like half an hour before we spoke, delivering a session, a 2 hour session on that to about 25 parents. And that question you asked is so huge. It's very difficult to answer. I can try and break it down. So, the common type of disordered eating that a lot of parents go into the groups with is something we call ARFID, or avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. And that's basically any reason why an autistic person might be restricting their diet or avoiding food. And the reasons why could be sensory, it could be a fear of new food, it can be stress. Stress has a massive impact on the body and digestion and the hormones. It could be anxiety, which unfortunately is quite common. It could be specific types of mental health, like anxiety disorders. It could be co-occurring health conditions. IBS, for example, is one that's quite common in autistic people. So there's so many reasons why an autistic person might have difficulties with eating or disordered eating that we often we have this kind of analogy of the iceberg. We put the disordered eating at the top. That's what we see on the surface. But actually, it's everything that's happening below the surface. It's, like we said, the sensory, the mental health, everything else that's contributing to it. They're the kind of causes. The challenge, though, is even if you can identify some of those causes now, if they've had the disordered eating for 5 years or 10 years, it's no longer just about one issue. So the approach is taking all the support to unpick what's happening below the surface and to allow them to have positive experiences with food and to try new things and new coping strategies. And yeah, it's quite a journey.
And I think the iceberg is a really good visual for people. And there, like with all these different causes, I think meal times can be some of the most traumatic experiences at home. So I'm wondering what you think might be some things parents or loved ones can do to support their autistic loved ones in these moments and make it less of a stressful and traumatic experience.
Well, I'll answer that, Doug. But first of all, did you have any eating difficulties growing up?
You know what? Like, I think growing up, I've always eaten everything. But like I think maybe I've always eaten too much. And as I've gotten older, I've realized like, oh, I have some eating challenges for sure due to anxiety and stress and probably a lot of sensory experiences lead into my some of my eating challenges.
Yeah. What then have you found that's helped?
I mean, 45 years later. I'm still trying to figure some things out.
Yeah, I
I
know.
think so. I think what's helped for me is not. I think it's the mental aspect of it in just not being so frustrated with myself if today I'm going to want to eat like things that are quote unquote unhealthy, like more desserts or more safe foods for myself. And then other days, so feeling good about those days versus other days when maybe I can have a salad or eat some vegetables because there's just sometimes like, yeah. And I think also for me, the executive functioning
Yeah.
challenges and the burnout, I always feel like I'm in burnout to some extent, impact my eating.
I think, I've come to some of the same conclusions. Like growing up, I had avoidant restricted food intake disorder, but I also had OCD and I still have
Mm.
OCD. And I think what I recognize in myself and a lot of the other adults that I'm around that, in the past got diagnosis of anorexia or binge eating disorder or ARFID or anything else is nowadays as adults, we're often aware that when stress hits, we can feel that our eating is changing or becoming more restrictive, or like you're saying, is going to things that are potentially less healthy. And sometimes we just have to go, okay, that's temporary, that's this moment. The stress is here. If we pushed ourselves, it's going to make it worse. We just need to accept that maybe for the next few days of the week, we're not going to eat the best. And I think that's part of the process in adulthood. It's almost like you're undoing the negativity that's been built around food. For a lot of young people, a lot of children, if you don't eat, for the parent, it's very distressing because a parent is told you're meant to feed your child and you feel quite distressed. And then, unfortunately, that desire to feed your child ends up putting a lot of demands and pressure on them. So, and then if they go through into formal support, they end up with tubes down the down their nose, and it can be quite traumatic. So, a lot of adults are actually in the process of kind of dealing with the after effects and the shame and the guilt around eating. Yeah, I'm the same as you. I just accept that some days just have to eat what I can eat.
Yeah.
Uh, Other people can find it weird if they want. I can take that.
Food is better than no food, for sure. So something else I was really interested in about your experience is, here in the States, the medical system is so dysfunctional and, often harmful. So you've experience with, the National Health Service England in reviewing autistic patients' care in psychiatric hospitals to get them back into the community or to prevent hospital, I get admittance or maybe readmittance. So I know preventing hospital admittance is a huge issue, but I'm wondering if there are some ways you think hospital systems can improve in working with autistic patients and their loved ones so that the chances of hospital admittance or readmittance, even just the slightest decreases in the coming years.
Okay, yeah, there's a lot that can be done. I've mentioned that it just became law last year for all NHS staff members to receive training on autism. And quite thankfully, that training is at every level. If you are a cleaner in a hospital or a GP surgery, you still have to receive some basic training on autism. If you are interacting with autistic people, you get a full day in person. And if you are in a specialized role or you're a decision maker, you have to receive up to 4 days worth of training every 3 years that really goes into depth. So that's monumental. It's going to take quite some time for that rollout to fully happen, but it does mean that in terms of preventing admissions, that in itself is going to make a big difference. But it is going to take quite a long time. We're training an entire new workforce because that training, Doug, it has to be done with an autistic person present. So that's 3 million NHS staff members that are receiving training where an autistic person has been present for 4 hours as part of that training, explaining their experience to them. I don't know about you, but a lot of people don't think they've ever interacted with autistic people, or they think that autistic people are only children having meltdowns. So for them to be trained by autistic adults, it's game changing. So I think that in itself will make a huge difference. I'm very pleased to be part of that process. As for what else can be done, the NHS has a lot of systems in place to there are new policies that are aimed to try and prevent hospital admission because we recognize hospitals are not good places for autistic people. If you end up in a crisis and go to hospital, you've lost your routines, you've lost your structure, you're in a sensory intense environment, all of those things. This all sounds great. I'm also aware that there are quite a lot of significant barriers and a lot of things we're also doing wrong and a lot of almost bureaucratic issues in the way systems work that also take us in the opposite direction. What do you think would help prevent people being admitted?
Well, I think they're somewhat on the right track with listening to and having autistic people give presentations. 4 hours seems like a lot of talking and could lead to burnout and stuff like that. So I'm a little concerned about that part of it.
Well, Doug,
Yeah.
I do. I make it
Yeah, yeah. So hopefully you're getting some time to recuperate, Lauren.
do
Yeah,
is at the start of the session, I get a box of stim toys out and I go and put them on the desks. And then I sit down with the occupational therapists and the consultants and I start talking to them about it. And they all look at me like, this is really, really weird. Why are you talking to them about these things? At the end of the session, they're all fiddling with them. And it sounds like it's burnout, but the way it works is the autistic co-trainer is there with a facilitating trainer. So you're in a tag team. So if you're feeling like a bit worn out, you can lean on your other trainer and you bounce back and forth. So 4 hours sounds like a lot, but actually it works really well. But yeah, sorry, I
yeah,
went off on one.
yeah,
What do you think would
yeah.
help?
I guess, from my experience of seeing doctors and supporting other autistic people and seeing doctors, a lot of times it's not so much the medical information from the doctors that seems to be the biggest barrier. It's actually listening and believing the autistic person and their experience. I think that's, just sort of like being a human. And those things, I don't know, like there's a superiority complex to an extent, I think, from, a lot of doctors. Every once in a while, we'll run into a great doctor that listens and supports, and, and that's like an amazing experience. Like, oh, wow, these professionals do exist.
Actually, I think that's why it's less important almost what we're teaching them, and it's more important that they're getting to see us as people. Because I mentioned my work in inpatient units. I could be working with a consultant doctor that's been working for 30 years with autistic people in crisis. And they will have 30 years of experience which tell them this is what autistic people look like, but they've never experienced autistic people who are not in crisis. So this, for these staff members, it's the first time they're actually seeing us as people.
Yeah.
And I think that breaks down what you're saying. You're talking about them talking down to us, aren't you? I think that helps break that because suddenly we're the same as them, almost. Yeah. What is there anything positive going on in terms of autism education for doctors in the States or in Ohio specifically?
I know there's hospital systems here in Ohio that are kind of like looking into things and are aware of the challenges. Like I think there's a long way to go. I've talked with a few autistic doctors here on Autism Stories, and then there's also Autistic Doctors International. But I think like we have a long way to go because I know there are so many more autistic doctors that are practicing that just don't feel comfortable in these toxic environments in disclosing that. I think also could be a huge benefit. So I think just how our medical system and the environments are just to allow doctors and nurses and physicians assistants that are autistic and neurodivergent to be open, to be able to feel safe to disclose their experiences. I think that also would go a long way.
But I've actually seen that kind of change in the stigma as it's happening here in the UK. When I first started delivering training to National Health Service staff, they would say they'd make these kind of disclosures like, "Oh, I have a cousin or my or that's autistic, or my sister's son is autistic." They don't, it's disconnected. It's somebody several people removed. Nowadays, though, we have the National Health Service staff going, my child, or my dad, or I suspect I am. And they don't always say autistic, they'll say neurodivergent. And we get them in every single class now, every single one of them, at every level, we have people disclosing in the class, which tells you the kind of cultural shift in people's, in the stigma around autism. I think it's absolutely amazing, and I think the fact that so many more staff, and it's looking like this is going to all education staff as well, is happening. That stigma around autism is going to be broken down even further. The future generations, I'm hoping, are going to have far better experiences moving through this world than perhaps we did.
I think they will. I think it's very slow. It's not as fast as we want it to go. But I do think I think they will have some better experiences definitely as we go along and as we as autistic people educate them and the world. Lastly, Loren, how can our listeners learn more about you and connect with you beyond this interview?
Okay. If you want to hear more of me talking about things, I have hundreds of videos on my YouTube. I also have a website with a lot of free resources on. If you are in the UK, I mean, if you want me to come to the States and can pay for me, I will come and train there. I deliver a lot of webinars online, so I can train anywhere. If you are in the southwest in the UK, the NHS has actually paid for me to give free one-to-one support to parents, carers, and anyone that supports autistic people, which is really cool. Our health service is doing some good things. But yeah, go to my website. You just Google my name and you find me. It's Loren Snow.
Well, Loren, I greatly appreciate the time today. Thanks so much for talking to me and letting me get out some of my frustrations about the medical system.
I'm glad I didn't start. I have a lot too. Thank you, Doug. A pleasure being here.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. We always love hearing from you and would especially love to hear from you relating to this episode on what improvements you think the medical system in your country could make to be more accessible to autistic people. We also really want to thank Loren for today's conversation. And to learn more about Loren, please check out the link in the podcast description for this episode. Here at Autism Personal Coach, our clients are the experts, our coaches are the guides. The majority of supports for autistics are not helpful. They try to fix us, not support us. That's why many are confused when we say our clients are the experts of their lived experience. Our clients are the experts for what has worked for them and about the things they need and want in their lives. Our coaches first listen to our clients and then ask thoughtful questions, offer resources, and strategize with our clients so they can get what they need to thrive. Would you want a guide in your life to coach you to get you the things you desire? If so, then visit autismpersonalcoach.com for more information. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism Stories, and if you did, if you could tell a friend, foe, or anyone you know about it so they could have the same enjoyable and educational experience as you when listening to Autism Stories, it would be very much appreciated. Until next time, I'm Doug Bletcher of Autism Personal Coach. Talk to you then.